So we got 4 items on the agenda tonight. We'll have a quick update on the report card that Annika will talk about. Kyle all sent us some slides today on a survey they sent out to the staff here, so we'll go through that. Data looks pretty good. Then Dr. Dunn had some questions for us to review in advance of the school board meeting, the special meeting next Monday. And then we'll wrap up and talk about our recommendation for the school board, returning back to school.
All right, should I jump in with the update?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So as a reminder, the Iowa County updates their dashboard on Fridays. So our next report card will be tomorrow. But the data is still trending up. And as of last Friday, so November 13th, our score remained at a 2. I don't think we would get to the score of a 1 unless our testing capacity dropped greatly. But I think my prediction is we will stay at a 2 tomorrow as well. Any questions or comments? And Dr. Fox, feel free to jump in with the local. I know you're a part of and Jane and Mr. Wainwright are part of the local discussions with our health department as well.
Yeah, I would say it's going to stay at 2 tomorrow. The only things that we can really, the things we would have to see to start gaining points would be a decrease in daily cases, decrease in positivity rate. The positivity rate has been it's 11.5 this last week. And I think our cutoff is 5. Is that right, Annika? So for the entire month of November, and I think the last half of October, we've been above that 5. So until that drops back down, I don't think we're going to see that number is going to improve all that much. And the daily cases is definitely going to be in that high range. The one thing that we might start to see is that the daily cases compared to the previous 2 weeks might start to improve because we had such a high peak. So when we see that, we might gain a point, but again, it's going to be a little while before those numbers actually truly trend in a good direction. And that's part of the reason why there's a 2-week lag on changing anything based on the number, is because it's going to take a while before things actually look better. It's an early indicator that things are looking better, but until we see that 2 solid weeks of that decrease, we're not going to see that number come back to the right direction.
In terms of positive cases, are you guys seeing it across all age groups, or is it in 1 or 2 bands?
It's pretty widespread. So it is there. I think the last several weeks, at least, there's been at least 1 case in every age group. This last week, there were, on the last school dashboard, I think there were quite a few more in the 0 to 17 group. So that was probably the most we'd seen in that group in the last week here. I think one day there were 10 in that group. And again, now we're seeing daily cases in the 30s to 50 range. I think today it was 40, 45 or 50. Yesterday was about 45. So the numbers have gone up in all of the age ranges, but that 0 to 17 has definitely still stayed high despite schools being closed to virtual in most of the schools in the district, if not all. And Mitch, maybe you can clarify if there's still any schools that are in person right now.
Iowa Grant had just transitioned to virtual. Otherwise, they were the last school that I was aware of in the county. I know Barneville had transitioned to virtual. Dodgeville has been. We had been. In my meeting with Debbie Sigenthaler on Wednesday, she even narrowed it down a little bit more and said in that 14 to 18-year-old group that there was kind of an uptick in numbers specifically to that group. So they've started to try to narrow down, instead of just 0 to 17, they've kind of tried to give it kind of the elementary age, middle, high age, and said that there was an increase in numbers there as well.
Do we know what any of the private schools around here are doing? I only ask because on the news this morning in Madison, they were talking about a private school and how they were doing. What the one citizen was talking about at 2 school board meetings ago around, having kind of like a live recording of the teacher teaching class. So I was curious if any other private schools around here were maybe doing that.
Erica, do you know if St. Joe's, because that would be the only private school in Iowa County that I would be aware of.
Yeah, and I honestly don't know, because they historically always follow our calendar schedule, and they follow, like, if we, cancel school for a snow day, they cancel. But they hadn't, they weren't following us in sort of that virtual, if we went virtual, that sort of thing. But I honestly don't know, since we've been virtual, if they have remained in person, or they didn't go right away. So I'm not 100% sure, but I'm gonna actually send an email and find out right now.
Okay.
And I quickly just pulled up the Iowa County data by age group. So this spans from March to November 13th. So in the 0 to 17, there have been 116 cases. It's a pretty balanced graph with fewer cases in the 66 and above age range. But that doesn't mean we have 116 active in the 0 to 17 currently. That's just what we have seen in totality.
Jane, is there anything you wanted to add or any color to add with respect to the school and the report card?
Just that the numbers of positives in the school has just gone up wildly fast. I had included this on one of the recent letters that it's been a couple days now, but in the last 2 weeks, as of a couple days ago, we had 20 cases, and in the previous 2 months there was 19. So that really makes me worry that the numbers are just rising exponentially.
And that's similar to the whole county for in terms of like burden of cases in the last 2 weeks compared to the prior. So more than half of the cases in the county since the very beginning have happened in the last 2 weeks. And so and those cases are what are listed as the active cases on that Iowa County information that they send out. So when they list an active case, that essentially means something that's been in the last 2 weeks. There's some nuance there to it, but you can kind of estimate that number. So with the huge increases in numbers we've seen over the last 2 to 3 weeks, to still see all those every day for the last week and a half, we have had more than half the cases have happened in the prior 2 weeks, and it just keeps going that way. So that means we're really exponentially increasing our cases in the entire county.
Yeah, and Sarah, I've been watching the models closely, the EPI models, and just the trend. I'm not seeing any indication that it's slowing. I'm feeling a little discouraged right now because I see our number continue to climb. Are you getting any inkling, any silver lining, any hope you can give me that we have crested or are about to crest, or are you seeing what I'm seeing?
I've been hoping that we were cresting, like, I don't know, every couple of days for the last month and a half now, where I see it just in the state, at least. County, we did, based on our score today, our 5-day case, this is at the hospital level, our county-wide 5-day case rate compared to 14-day case rate had leveled off, and now it went up again. So I was hopeful that we were maybe kind of past the peak and starting to trend down, but we lost another point for that today. So, and our number, if you know, the 5-day compared to 14-day, those case rates compared to 2 weeks ago are like, it's crazy higher. It's like, I don't know, 31 and a half. And 2 weeks ago, it was like 20 and a half or something like that. So, so I don't know, I'm continue to be hopeful, but I'm not seeing any data that really supports that hope, I guess, at this point.
Okay.
And would you say this uptick, has it followed models of previous pandemics, or is this like a surprise that it's increasing?
I think it's pretty predictable, and I think most of the other states are now following what Wisconsin just happened to be kind of the first of the bad wave here. And so I think the other states will be able to kind of predict their course, maybe based on Wisconsin's course. But since we were the first state to have this really bad fall wave, I don't know that anybody can really predict where it's going to go from here. But if you look at the shape of the curve, if you compare it to other states in other waves, so the problem with those peaks is that there's just as much disease on the falling side of the peak as there is on the rising side of the peak. So even if we're at the peak, we still have just as much as we've already gone through in the last 2 months, just as much to come of new cases. But if you look at there is a pretty specific shape to the curve of the states that have gone through it. And so that I do feel like we're probably pretty close to the peak, but I don't know when it's actually going to turn, if it's going to be, you know, this week or after Thanksgiving, or Thanksgiving's going to throw a big wrench in all of it and it's going to kind of start coming down and then go back up. But yeah, all the other states are going to be watching our curve pretty closely, I would say.
All right. Anybody else have any more questions on the report card before we have Kyle start to walk us through the survey they did? All right. Mr. Carey, do you want to kind of walk us through this and maybe give a little brief overview of what kind of drove you guys to doing this survey?
You bet. I think I can share screen. I think I have privileges. All right, you guys all see the screen? Yes, no? No.
I think,
No.
Justin, you'll have to stop sharing to allow Kyle.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, there you go.
Let's try this again. You guys see this now?
Yep.
All right. All right. So basically this was, I had a large amount or a decent amount of teachers that were actually requesting me to do a survey prior to the ad hoc committee meeting. So that's really what spurred it. So I asked a few back, like what types of questions, those things, and then kind of pooled them into these questions. So in an effort to be as open as possible, these questions came from me that I pulled from other staff members. This is the actual graph. The one I sent you guys is this guy, where I've basically reduced down. So I want to explain a couple of things before we get going. I started out with elementary, middle school, high school when I built it. I'm by far not an expert when it comes to doing the surveys and or spreadsheets. So we have that. I'm not Annika, but I went to Mr. Austin today, and he also helped me out quite a bit on some of the graphing. So you guys don't have the elementary, middle, high school, but I thought it would be good to ask that question so that if we had specific data we wanted to be able to pull from a particular building, we could do that in the future, and we have the spreadsheet. So that's not in your guys's, but if anybody wants to dive down, that's available. Do you feel safe in coming back? That was just a simply yes or no, which you have. When we go over to this one, how many hours are you working? Now, again, I made the mistake, or good, depending on how you look at it, in leaving an option tag. And being teachers, some of them wanted to write paragraphs about explanations instead of actually picking one of the options here. So I went through each one of them, and okay, this one says 40, this one's 55 to 60. I always erred on the low side. So if it said 55 to 60, I put them in the 55 category, 50 hours, even though they have a description. So I just wanted to be open with everybody that when you see this, and all I could do was average it out at 52.5, and you see all these little pies that you don't know what they are. On mine, we averaged them out to 52.5. Okay. Do you feel safe coming back to the school? It is, if you look at mine again, when we did this, it was about 10:30 today. I had 75 responses by noon, which is what I told the staff I'd leave it open. So yours could be off by 2%. I think this one's 72%. And the one I sent you a little bit earlier, 71%, of the staff does not feel it is safe to come back to school and I put it in days and weeks, thinking that would give them the ability to think in that early to mid-December kind of scenario. And then we're close to Christmas type thing. Okay. Scrolling down. What is your mental health? Got a nice curve here in that middle of the 3. I thought that was actually pretty decent considering, I know we don't want to see this down here. But I don't know if you're a parent versus anybody else, if you're going to get a different curve on any profession right now, that scenario either. This was a big one. And I think this one derived from the previous school board meeting about screen time with teachers in educating. And if you go back to my other graph too, that I have that I can share out, I condensed this down. Out of 75 respondents, 2 said that they could or think that it would be beneficial. And I think one of them said a half hour kind of a thing. So if we wanted to dive down into something like that, elementary versus high school, I believe it was 1 at the high school and 1 at the elementary kind of thing. So overwhelmingly, they're saying the screen time that they have is more than enough, or at least enough, adequate, and that any more would not be beneficial. I think that's a pretty overwhelming thing from the teachers there. This one, educationally, was the hybrid working as well as in November as it was September. This one was really more me driven, and then I broke it up into 3 categories: elementary, middle school, and high school. And by me, I say Mr. Austin helped me with it. It pretty much did it. And the reason why is because there was in my classroom a profound difference in the hybrid system once the athletes were removed from my classroom. Okay. So I was expecting a larger break between the elementary, who don't have the athletes, still being affected by COVID and students being pulled out and stuff like that, but not the athletes that were under quarantine. And it wasn't as big as I suspected. So we're at 60% say that, yes, it's as good in October, November as it was in September. 55 are still saying yes here. And then at the high school, I don't know why it's flips, it's 52%, right? So it's really across the board, not too bad. And I was expecting the high school to really say, no, this was really hard. And I'll just give you my example was, I then got quarantined at a particular point the week before the actual whole school went virtual. So then I was home teaching virtually back into students Zooming from in my classroom with a teacher in my classroom and then other kids at home, right? So I'm home virtually Zooming into my classroom. And so for me, it was really difficult to do that. So I expected that number to be harder, but apparently it's not. So I just wanted to point that out that was kind of the case. Given the current circumstances with a lot of virtual students, which model do you is educationally better for the classroom. And I should have probably underlined educationally too. But it is important that, 62% say that virtually is educationally better right now. And the reason why I wanted to use that was because if we go up to the safe situation here, do you feel safe? It's 70% here, right? So they're saying they're not feel safe, but they're giving their opinion that educationally even we can do this at a better rate than we can coming in. And I made the mistake of, after going through the data, there were 2 people that put in 100% in person, and the way they worded it, one person worded it 100% in person, and another person worded it face to face. So I condensed them into 100%. So again, there was a couple of little things that were different, but this is where the teachers are saying that they can actually teach virtually better in general than the hybrid given the situation. But if we later get down into the comments, I'll explain that is likely due to the yo-yo, where if it wasn't a yo-yo situation, that might push back into the hybrid scenario, right? It's harder because they're going back and forth between the two, but if it was one or the other, because a lot of the comments do lead to that. So again, this is where they're at too, broken up into elementary, high school. High schools obviously can do it a little bit easier virtually than the other ones. So then I apologize, I didn't get them out to you till probably 11 o'clock today, so I don't know how much anybody got to read through all of these, but this is 7 pages worth of responses. When you allow teachers a paragraph form, they take care of it pretty well. Instead, maybe I should have done a short answer, but it's all there. How many of you guys had the ability to take a look at it?
I read them all twice.
Okay. There is a lot of repeating things that you can certainly read over and over again. It's a different person saying the same thing over and over, whether it amounts to safety, whether it's saying, we need things to be consistent. It's difficult. And that's where I was talking about that yo-yo effect. So right now they're saying it's definitely better to teach virtually than it is in the hybrid system, but I can't say for sure that that's not because we went hybrid, virtual, hybrid, virtual. And I'll give you an example of my own situation that makes that very difficult. So we are, coming back on the 30th as of now, that's the date, right? So me being out and me setting up a Zoom schedule on my previous 2 Tuesdays, I want to expand my time in between classes because I'm running one class into another. I'm running on it, as I'm doing it. In order for me to do that, I already have kids that can't make that time because they have a geometry going on. And with those 12 kids, I've already made separate situations work. So if I separate that out, I then mess with other kids' schedules. And for a 2-week time, I'll just deal with the situation that's going on. If we're going to be virtual through Christmas, I can make those adjustments one time and see what I mean? So that's where the yo-yo effect becomes difficult from a teacher situation. That's just my example, kind of a scenario where if and I'm not saying anybody can fix it, and no, there's no way we could know that it was going to get shut down, but it might be easier to know that you're not going back until a specific date, regardless of our report card, if that makes sense. So
Kyle, from a teacher's perspective, what stood out to you the most in either the data or the comments? I didn't get a chance to read through all the comments yet.
So every single, I shouldn't say every single, but over and over again, pretty much what I've been saying multiple times is everybody on here is saying, without a doubt, we want to be back 100%. We want even hybrid over virtual. It's resounding over and over again, followed by, I would say, in 90% of the comments, it's not good to go back. I can do what I'm doing now better than I can if you go back, and safer. So that would be what I would say if you read each one. And again, there's outliers, but I would say that message over and over across the board seems to be more of a consistent. I actually went through and started to like pen out on a lot of them, like whenever they said safe, and I tried to do that, and then I got overwhelmed myself and couldn't do it. So it's just a matter of reading them all. And like Anna said, you almost got to read them twice or pull them out if you want to and do that. But they do a pretty good job of, if you look up at the graphs, going either between the safe situation. Do you believe it's safe to go back now? The screen time is a definite one. I can honestly tell you, in our Zoom meeting that we have at the high school, that came up, and it really got down to the point of teachers being upset, going, I don't even know why we're talking about this. So then to see that across the board on the survey afterwards, that went from the elementary school on, was definitely a obvious thing, saying the staff is overwhelmed along that. It gets pretty aggressive in some of them, saying, if you do any more screen time, if these kids can handle any more screen times, I can't handle any more screen time. Even some of them saying, have the school board sit on there for 8 hours a day on screen time. And, that kind of scenario gets pretty, do it and then see what you think after that, And there's plenty of studies that in our other meetings would say that it's not beneficial to do those kind of things. Speaking from a parent for a brief second here, I love the way my 5th grader gets it. I watch him as I'm doing stuff when I was at home or whatnot, and it's screen time, work time, screen time, work time. It's lecture, do. I just love it. I think I'm very happy with, considering the circumstances, I'm very happy with what he's getting.
Do you guys still all meet? Oh, go ahead.
So quickly, I'd say, coming from my perspective, I asked some of my classmates today, what do you think of screen time? That was one of the topics. And again, resoundingly, the result was what we've been doing. It's been good. A lot of people that I know even struggle at the end of the day that we go, they get a headache, tired of being on the computer, but they say, it's good to be able to have a day to see all the teachers get all the work done and then have the rest of the week interspersed with Zooms and then on-demand work. So I'd say what I gauge from that info, at least from my classmates, is what we're doing now in terms of when and how often we have the Zooms. It's been working fine.
Okay. I mean, do you and your friends talk about like, hey, if the school or the teachers could do this one thing, it would make it so much better? Or is it, I'm just trying to think, is there little things that can be done to the virtual or the hybrid program to make it go from good to great?
At this time, I don't necessarily think I have anything specific. I can definitely ask that over the next few weeks, though. If there's one thing that you could change about what we're doing right now that would make your experience in learning a lot better while we're virtual, what would that be? So yeah, I can definitely do that.
Okay, perfect.
So I did find a few interesting comments. And like you said, Kyle, really it's just resonating. What you're saying is really repeated, and the message is coming through really loud and clear. We all want our kids to be back in school but if it can be done safely. There were a few comments that I thought maybe we could, dig into. I think, people commented on the shift being mentally hard for not only the teachers and staff, but also, our children. So I thought that was interesting, that yo-yo effect, may not just impact the educators. There was a comment about some young students really need to be in person, social and emotional health. And I saw there were some other ones where maybe they could do like an assessment. So if there were students who truly needed that, that support, is there a way to do it for those individuals? Is that something, Mr. Wainwright, that's feasible or even an option if there are families who really need that extra touch?
Right now, our school psychologist, Caitlin Ulrich, is reaching out to students, whether it's one-on-one or in smaller groups. She's asking staff members to share with her any student names that staff might be concerned about the social emotional. So I know we have some things out there in place that we're trying to do, and I'm in the same groups of emails that staff get, doesn't matter what level. So I know she is constantly sending out information saying, hey, we can try this, or, let me know if there's somebody I need to reach out to directly. So obviously that we can always do more, but we are trying to make that available.
Right.
We do have some select students coming in as well. So it's not like we're not bringing anybody in. We had, I think today it was a total of about 10 kids. They're the kids that need a little more at the middle school, high school in order to make sure that they're successful. So we are doing that as well.
Thank you. That's good to know. That's good to know.
And in addition, like I'm literally already partially wrote an email. I'm going to suggest another student. That student knows I'm suggesting that they come in, and that suggestion is relatively, you are coming, kind of a thing, without a parent saying no, that kind of thing, because they need it, or they're missing that kind. So the school is able to do that at a smaller level. The other thing that I got from a lot of this is, we pull that 53 hours per week kind of thing. And I do understand that anybody could look at that and say, well, who's going to put they work 20 hours a week down, right? That kind of thing. I understand that scenario. But I took everything on the low level on that. There were 60 pluses on there, and a substantial group was in that 60 plus range. And in order to get it to work in a spreadsheet, I had to take out the pluses and so on and so forth. So the averages come down on all those things. So the average is well above that 53. And then when you read the comments and they're talking about the fatigue and not being able to sustain what they're doing, that kind of goes over and over again. And I know I'm the staff member, and I don't care who you are under this scenario. Everybody's in that same boat and fatigue too. So I'm not trying to go, cry for the teachers kind of thing. I get it. But it truly is. And anytime we do shift back and forth, it is more difficult on the parents, on the teachers, on everybody, and on the kids. And again, I'm not trying to, point it at Mitch when we went all virtual. I believe that was probably the right call given the circumstances and all that kind of stuff. I think from the teacher side, and I think when I got bombarded by teachers, it was because they see the 30th coming and they're not confident that we're going to come back. And they're also scared to come back. So the anxiety's there, and they don't know how to plan beyond that, where if they knew how to plan beyond it, even though that would reduce their anxiety, not necessarily reduce their workload, but at least be able to plan instead of plan switch kind of thing. So I think a lot of it is there too. So
thank you for that. Some feedback that I've received from families who've reached out to me is around, and some of the comments are in here as well, around internet and screen time. And if the expectation was for more screen time, I think some families are not wanting more, and to the point where they would, unenroll from the district if that was an expectation, because they're having internet issues or just don't want more screen time. So I think we should keep that in mind as well, just with enrollment numbers. And I don't know if anyone else has thoughts around screen time or a virtual internet.
Along those exact thing, I got a phone call from somebody that took the survey and said, hey, I took the survey, but I'm actually going out to a student's house right now because they had issues with multiple different things. They used their phone, then they used their Kajit, and they used this, and they were having problems with Zoom today. And her concern was exactly that If you add more screen time to that, and you have multiple kids zooming again because they're overlapping so much, that that becomes more difficult also on the kids, and the rural kids will suffer more than typically your city kids in that scenario as well.
Seems
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
lot of that would have to do with what grade level you're looking at too for the screen time. I mean, high school kids can deal with virtual a lot easier than elementary school, I think. But then there's the attention span of, second graders not going to be able to pay attention to Zoom for an hour probably. I mean, I'd imagine it's pretty difficult as an elementary school teacher. But then we are faced with, if we have to be virtual, we have to be virtual. So how do you we don't really have much choice. I understand what you're saying too, Kyle. It's not bouncing back and forth. Is that kind of what you would prefer, to keep this virtual the rest of the semester?
There were several comments in the written section where teachers specifically, I think, said that they would love if they could be allowed to know that they're not going to return until after break, that it would provide more stability and maybe even a healthier mental mind space, just to be able to settle into this current way of teaching and know that they're going to stay here without that anxiety. I think there were, a handful of comments to that effect in the written section.
Yeah. So example, Bob, that I kind of gave earlier, if on Monday night they say that, so the problem would be this, let's say Monday night they say, we're going to December 4th, one more week. Okay. That's one more week. Do I still go in and change my entire Tuesday and separate everybody out, re-go through and figure out, because this is what has to happen, just to give you a quick situation. So here is your typical Zoom schedule across freshmen, juniors, sophomores, seniors on their day. These are the Zoom schedules coming in. That doesn't include the actual time that they're in the classroom, or would be their in-person time, if that makes sense. So example would be, as I start to run my Tuesdays and I'm trying to cut across, my sophomores that have Mr. Smith at 7:00 can't attend the Zoom that I have in my class during that time, because they are taking Mr. Smith's time. So then I set up a different time for them. Well, the junior class also can't fit at that time, so I set up a separate time for them. And the issue I'm having right now is that I haven't allowed myself enough time across those Zooms to get through what I want to get through, because I'm selfishly me, my stuff's more important than the other teachers, right? So I run one, and then other kids start coming in to the Zoom for my next class. And if I know that's going to happen to Christmas, I'm going to make that adjustment right now so that I can do that. And I'll go through that hardship, re-go through what kids it affects, and re-change those so that I can catch those kids too somewhere else, right? If we're going to go to the 30th, I'm going to live with it. I'm going to suck it up and lose those minutes that I'm going to do on the back end and not mess with it. Because if I mess with the kids' schedules more, it's too hard for them. It's too hard for everything else. It's not worth doing it. Just I'll deal with it. And the kids, that's the big thing. Where if I know it's going to Christmas, I will make that change. It'll go out on my thing tonight, and they'll know, redo your Zoom schedule, send it to me if there's a problem. I'll remake it for you, and we'll set up other times for those that can't make that, and we'll make those adjustments. So that's why the yo-yo goes like this back and forth. That makes it more difficult, if that helps.
I see that there's, go ahead, sir.
Are you able to break down the people who did make those comments about not feeling like we should go back till January, in terms of elementary or middle, high school? Like, are there overwhelming number of elementary school teachers who say, let's just go back now? Or, I mean, I know that they're not saying that, but was it mostly the middle and high school teachers who were saying, let's wait till January, or was that across the board?
We didn't separate that out. That is something I could do tomorrow. That would take a little bit more time because it's not a true like yes or no question or separator. You'd have to go through and read and flag each one, but I could do that.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're hearing the voices of, those elementary, because that feels like the piece that we haven't really had as much input on, is the elementary teacher parent side of it, maybe specifically. And so if we know that their burden of virtual teaching might be even more than middle school, high school, and even they are saying we should wait till January, then that would maybe just carry a little bit more weight on that question.
I
Well,
can
that's
certainly
what-
do that tomorrow.
That's what I was trying to get to with the, in the circumstances, it is hybrid or virtually better for you? That, and I broke that into elementary, middle, and high school. And I was surprised that consistently 60%, 62 at the elementary, 59% at the middle school, and 65 at the high school, more, says that virtually is better. It's better for them to stay educationally, not safety. Educationally, it's better for them to stay virtually at this moment. And then if you go up to the safety portion of it, that number is 70% do not feel safe coming back scenario. So they are two separate questions. And would you want to dive into the, do you feel safe, and see if that's more elementary or high school?
No, I think it was more those comments where it's pretty hard to sort it because everybody's saying their different paragraph, but there were quite a lot of people that Maggie pointed out were commenting that they don't think we should go back before Christmas. So I was just curious if that was across the board or not.
I wonder if we could get, looks like there's some elementary school teachers on here, if they wanted to, tell us what their feelings are on the elementary school.
My name's Jenny Singer. I'm a third grade teacher. I'd be happy to speak. Just from my perspective, when I have 8 and 9-year-olds coming back in person after a stretch of virtual learning, it's like the first day of school all over again. However, I only have them for 2 days, and then we go on Zoom for 3 days, and then it's the weekend, and then they're back in person. So when we get a set of routines at the elementary level, we really like to practice those over and over. So right now we are Zoom experts and we're doing great and we have our schedule down. And so if we go back in person for a few weeks and then shift back, it is very hard on the kids and us as well. But so I would agree that the yo-yo effect is a big stressor.
Kyle or Mitch, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Morgan Burris. I would just kind of echo what Jenny said. Just knowing not long-term, but for an extended period of time makes it much easier on everybody. We had parent-teacher conferences this past Wednesday, and I had a lot of comments saying, we just would like to know the plan, what's going to happen. Going back and forth is hard. I teach the virtual 4K piece when we are in person. And I will tell you that my numbers the last week before we went virtual skyrocketed. And I had a lot of families comment that it was harder for their kids to get a good experience with our Zoom meetings because there were just so many kids on there, because many families were opting for the fully virtual model at that point in time, or families were quarantined because of exposure. And so I think just like Kyle has mentioned, the yo-yo back and forth is not only hard on the teachers, but it's hard on families and students as well, even at the 4K level.
Something I texted Annika on today was, would it be useful as a committee to say, like, what if each of us reached out to 5 parents and, got their thoughts? I mean, we have the snapshot now from Kyle and you guys about what teachers are feeling like. Do we now go see what parents say? I mean, as a father of a 5-year-old, I'm home with her while she does her class, and they do a good job. I mean, it's impossible to keep a 5-year-old entertained for more than a half hour because it's just, like I was telling her teacher, it's just not enough activity, but they're caught between a rock and a hard place, in my opinion, with somebody that young. So I was just, what do you guys think about reaching out to other parents?
What kind of data would you be interested in getting from parents? What kind of information would you be seeking?
I think kind of the same information Kyle got to a certain degree is, what are your thoughts on going back, or how is virtual going? Are your kids telling you, if we did this one thing, it would be 10 times better? I just know at the last school board meeting, the school board was, well, you guys are saying everything is going good, but nobody kind of said it wasn't going good. So are you guys kind of locked into this group think kind of situation? So I just thought, if the teachers' responses are kind of like the control, and then we can see what the parents are thinking.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, to nail it down would make sense, but maybe at this point, a lot of people have their schedules figured out, like babysitters or grandparents or somebody that's watching the kids too. So maybe the consistency is a good thing, but I don't know, maybe it's not. I think a lot of the people that would be upset or have a problem with it would probably be more of the care concern more than, I mean, the schooling's obviously important too, but we can only do so much. I mean, I think the elementary teachers can only do so much too. The attention span is short. There's no kids around them. It's a pretty difficult situation. So you're not going to get the same as if it was in person. But as far as like Justin, you're with your child during the Zoom, so you have to be there, or somebody has to be there with them. Is that more of a is that kind of interfering more than it's helping with that half-hour Zoom? Is there other ways, do the teachers do YouTube so they can get lessons that way? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. I don't know how you'd actually do the survey except to just email it out, have them identify themselves maybe.
And I didn't even really want to do a survey because personally, I'm kind of tired of doing surveys. I do them all the time at work, and it's kind of like I kind of give short answers because I just want to get the survey done with. So I thought it could be more beneficial if it was more personal and like, hey, we just want to see how it's going. We don't have to identify you. It's more just like, hey, how's it going? How can it be better? Just
maybe just the people that have a big problem with something, and that's, if everything's fine, we don't really need to hear from them. Maybe it's fixing the problems that are out there.
I will say I talked to a lot of parents for, at Mineral Point, but then also other districts who, everybody's kind of dealing with the same types of things at different schools, and every school is doing it a little differently. So when their kids are coming in for well checks, or when the parents are in for their own well checks, this is like the topic of conversation because it affects everybody's wellness and everybody, it's something, I don't know, just unusual, I guess, in everybody's lives right now. So we're having to kind of talk it through. And the one group that I feel, and I am part of this group, parents of kids with special learning needs, so like ADD, for example, virtual is not an ideal learning mode for many kids with ADD. And so that is just one group of parents where I've heard, but it's not that that group of parents wants to, push to all in person to fix that problem. It just, that is a group of kids that is suffering a little bit more with learning and adapting to this new model. And it's number one, like organizational skills and time management. I mean, those are like the two things you need for virtual learning to go well for like independent learners, middle school and up. And those are like the two biggest struggles for kids with ADD and kids with other learning needs, or time management and organizational skills. And so I think everybody else that I've talked to has, I think, now kind of adapted to what we're in, where we say, well, we'll see what it is next week, but they're on virtual, they're on their Zooms, they just kind of have figured it out. Whereas back in September, it was a lot more of angst over like, how will I do this? Who's going to watch the kids? Who's going to stay home with them? I do have a couple of people that I know who have struggled with providing care for their elementary school kids because either the kids were on quarantine or the care provider was on quarantine. So how do you, like, you know, can grandma come watch them if she's on quarantine from work? Can she come watch them if the kid is on quarantine from a possible exposure at school? And so that has been a little bit more of an impact just as those numbers come up across the county. There's just a lot more people that are kind of impacted by that, but I'm not sure that that would change much if people were in person either. There would just be that much, probably even more of it in terms of those care exposures.
I quickly want to interject before we move on. So over the past few minutes, I've got some more recommendations from fellow students on how virtual learning could be better. Obviously, I have seen a little bit of that the yo-yo thing, consistency in the model that we're in. Also with what Dr. Fox was talking about the organizational things. There are some teachers where you'll see in their Google Classrooms, things are very organized and nice and laid out for the week and posts come out early. But then with other teachers, the assignments might not come as early and they're more just scattered out there. And students obviously prefer when, you know, one teacher might post out, if possible, their whole week organized so it's easier for everybody to understand, okay, here's what I need to do today. Here's what I have to do to be prepared for the next day. Another thing that I've seen is an internet thing. One student that I was speaking with said, you know, they have a cap on their internet and they've been doing so much more Zoom every day, themselves, their siblings, their parents, all at home. And it really gets hard because they're also in a rural area. And once you get that cap, it's already hard enough using the not so great Wi-Fi, but now for the next while, you're stuck to using maybe cellular data, using your phone, using a personal hotspot, and they're concerned that if we were to spend more time on Zoom in general, then that would make the internet usage even harder. And it's obviously more challenging when there's multiple people in a household on Zoom at the same time. So if they would have to battle with their siblings that also have classes for internet connection, that might be an issue. So that's what I've gotten back so far, but just some things to throw in there and think about.
I think you make a good point, Matthew, with the teachers having, I mean, they're all trying to figure this out by themselves. I don't think there's any cohesive, arrangement where they all get together and try to figure out the best methods of how to do this virtual thing. But maybe at this stage, if they did collaborate, maybe they can share ideas of what works better than others. Even just going from hybrid to virtual is a whole nother shift for everyone. How do you give tests now? I mean, it's virtual. So, before it was on the Friday or the day that you're in school, but, and the athletes have been quarantined for probably 3-4 weeks. So that's a new thing too, as far as the shift, from the person to the hybrid, and then now you're virtual too. But I don't know if maybe Matt, I don't know, do they collaborate on different, best practices or right now in the high school I was referring to, but I guess elementary school is probably the same situation.
I believe when teachers get the opportunity to talk with each other, yes, they are working on collaborating and trying to make the best of every opportunity for kids. I will tell you that time is very short, right? I mean, they're working their tails off on trying to make sure everything's set up and ready to go. So it's not like we have a set, this is when everybody can get together, because it is very, the schedule is very, I want to call it hectic because there are so many pieces to it moving all the time. But yeah, I do know, I hear teachers all the time talking about, best practice and things that way. I usually have a lot of those conversations with them when I get a chance to talk with them, but.
And there's tools that they're offered to, like the online testing. I don't know how you do that, but there's special tools probably that you offer them that the school has purchased to allow that type of activity, or maybe the organization and that scheduling. And
a lot of the testing stuff is done through Zoom and whatnot and breakout rooms. So that's part of how we've tried to work with it. we have an extra monkey wrench thrown in there with the MacBooks. If you have Chromebooks, they make a lot of software for like internet monitoring and tools that kind of can lock down your Chromebooks. But we are MacBooks from 10th grade through 12th grade, so that actually makes that more difficult as well, because they don't have the technology for the MacBooks because it's not a Chrome browser. So
there's other collaboration too. Mr. Austin actually stepped in, I would say about a month ago. When we're in the hybrid model, one of the crutches of the hybrid model for testing reasons, right, is it's obviously the day they're here is the day to do the test because you can monitor them, so on and so forth. On the flip side, the problem with that is that takes away a lot of your lecture time when they absorb that too, right? So you're balancing that. And I think somebody emailed Mr. Austin or so on and so forth. That might have been the sophomore class. I'm not really sure, but they had like 7 tests. They were going to come in and boom, right? And that's not okay. It's not okay for us to do that to them. That that's what's going to happen. So spreadsheet was made, went out all the teachers. They shifted stuff around from this week to whatever, and we function that way so that it's more palatable to the students and stuff. So it's done digitally, but does Miss Notham know exactly when, Mr. Cool is going to give a test each time? Not every single time, but there's spreadsheets out there that you're supposed to try to put the stuff in to mitigate that as best we can. All my stuff comes out on Wednesdays and it's never due. Well, I shouldn't say never. There's exceptions, especially when we do the yo-yo, there's far more exceptions, right? But when I'm in one system, I can make the Wednesday to Tuesday thing. When we yo-yo switch around, then now I need this due Friday because I'm going to see you on Monday and things have changed. But for the most part, that is that way for me.
I would add in that obviously with limited time, test quizzes, things are being modified, to capture more of do they know it rather than, an expanded list of questions. It might only be 7 or 8, but they're really directed towards, do you know this? Or they're focusing on some project stuff. And there's a lot more different, unique things that I think in the end, when we're past COVID and all this, that it's really going to help our kids grow and learn.
And it's just like, I feel like we've been coming back to all night with the yo-yo effect of going back and forth from model to model, and then just finding that stroke of consistency and tying it all together. It's obviously going to take time, and maybe more time could be allowed if we decide on something to do going forward in the short term, I guess, if that's what you might call it. But obviously, we want to try and make the experience as best as possible. It's just, how does that happen without knowing exactly what the next week might look like?
I would like to speak to that. We're in the worse conditions than we were when we were forced to go virtual twice already. So even if we opened up, chances are we're going to be put into a position where we need to close again. So if we're talking about all the negatives of yo-yoing by opening and closing, can we talk about a recommendation on avoiding that and extending virtual? And to what point at this time do we recommend? Because that's the theme that we keep hearing is, opening up and closing is not easy. And if we know that we're in the same circumstances, we know what's likely to happen. So where do we go from here?
I guess, Jane, what's your recommendation based on your role at the school? Is it to keep virtual through the rest of the semester?
Yeah, until after Christmas. At least I would say, I think it was January 11th. Monday, January 11th makes sense to me because that gives us almost 2 weeks from New Year's.
When does the semester end?
Semester ends December 23rd. This year because of the schedule this year with the referendum, we actually moved everything up. We were going to have a week when we came back, so we changed the semester to the end of December so kids didn't have to study over the week or over the break for finals when we came back. So that actually throws another wrench into it.
Yeah, that's going to be your challenge is the testing because, pretty real. it's probably pretty realistic that it's going to be mostly virtual, if not all virtual, until the end of the semester too.
Sure.
You know, that one day that everybody was meeting was for testing anyway. So now it's a matter of, I mean, it's kind of a big move, maybe trying to move that testing from in person to virtual somehow to, I don't know how you do it, but you'll figure it out.
Well, and teachers are working on that right now. You're right, because they, we got forced
Right.
to go
Yeah,
back
they
to the
have to.
virtual, and they are giving tests and quizzes and assessments, and they're
Right.
trying to find the best way to do that. So,
I don't know if does anybody disagree with. I mean, you could say the 30th, but I think on the 30th, you're gonna look at those numbers. They're still gonna suck. I mean, people are still getting sick, and it's not just COVID sick; it's just colds. So, any type of illness is gonna freak people out. I'm sure Jane will be sending everybody away for a test as soon as they walk in the door, right? They have a sniff or a cough or whatever. But so it's going to get more and more difficult as the weather gets colder. People are indoors more. So I don't know how, if you recommend to the end of the year, it's going to go beyond that. January's not going to be getting good either. So I think the thing I'm looking for is a virtual model like we have. Is there something else that we need to look at to make it more palatable, make it, better? And I think that's, with Justin talking about reaching out to some parents to find out what they need to make this more workable for them, I think is probably a good idea. I can't imagine what it's like to have elementary school kids right now, though. Even being a teacher would be difficult. I don't think we have a choice, though.
No, at least me personally, I support Jane's recommendation because it gives us some consistency through the rest of the year for teachers to plan everything out, and we can reassess as the next 6 weeks go by. I just think if we go back, it's a 99.9% chance we'll go back to virtual.
Yeah,
So
maybe
plan-
a little lead time would help too. If you decide to go beyond the 30th, you should probably decide like right now, because there's less than 2 weeks away, and it would be nice to allow teachers to plan and schedule, because I think they're probably looking out a week, at least maybe 2 weeks in advance of how they're going to do things too. So that would help. Just say, let's just shift it out at least 2 weeks from where we're at, or 3, if you can't just decide to do it the rest of the year or the rest of the semester.
And maybe other people can speak to more details on this, but I've heard from parents and teachers in other districts that they've already declared that they're going till January before they come back in person. And I think, that's an easier thing maybe to swallow than like the 2 weeks at a time kind of thing. So yeah, I would agree. I heard today that Pecatonica has already decided that they're not going back till mid-January. I think Barneveld and I can't remember what Dodgeville stated for their return date, Erica.
It's November 30th as of now, and they have a board meeting on Monday to kind of discuss that.
I'm okay with, the end of the year too. It's just, I know that there might be other people on the board that might have other reasons for not doing it. But if they don't want to do it, at least gives people heads up of when it's going to go in and out of virtual. Like a couple week lead time minimum would be a benefit if they do want to go back and forth.
I guess I would say, go ahead.
You can go ahead, Matt. I'll go after you.
Okay. I would say personally, I would support obviously waiting till the end of the year or early next year, because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID numbers going forward, especially with Thanksgiving, the holiday season, New Year's. We don't know what that's going to bring. And also, if we want to make this virtual learning experience better, I feel like some of that might come from, okay, we know we're going to be in it for a while, so we may as well take the time to make changes instead of just holding out.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think recommending that we go through the holidays is prudent, and that giving a little space after the holidays, to Jane's point, because people are going to be getting together regardless of recommendations. I also wonder if there's some kind of semantic way we could communicate that it's a reevaluation date, not a potential return to school date. That I don't really know how you would word that, but there seems like there's something to like, oh, we might be going back this day, that puts it in people's heads that perhaps it's not a go back day, perhaps it's a marker in the sand for the school board to evaluate and then give people a heads up for a change if a change is possible.
I echo that. And Matthew, I was shaking my head at listening to you speak. Everything you say is always really, really highly intelligent and appreciative coming from you. It's pretty amazing. So compliments to you on that. So I echo that same thing with the yo-yo. Speaking for the teachers based upon the graph that I provided and stuff like that, I would also agree that the 75% based upon the graph would also say they would recommend not coming back before Christmas. I worded it in days and weeks trying to allude to that situation. I didn't want to say months and get us, halfway into January kind of a thing or scare people, but that's where the average teacher would be, or 75% would be on that. So that would be the recommendation probably from the staff in general at a 75% rate.
So
anyway.
I would like to talk about what Maggie recommended then, because I think having a reevaluation date in mind that gives families enough time and staff enough time to adjust if needed. So if we say January 11th, potentially, and that could change, whatever the group decides would be a good recommendation, I'd like to have a date before that to come together and reevaluate. And enough time for us to have this conversation, make a recommendation to the board, let the board decide, and let families know. So I don't mean to push this out further, but would having a potential start date of the 18th with our, meeting date on the 7th and then a board meeting on the 11th, does that give everybody enough time to reevaluate everything?
This is me speaking personally as a teacher, not as the group here, because I'm going to probably go against the average. Well, maybe I'm not, because when I read the teachers here, we want our kids. We want, so it's difficult for me. I want to puke when I said that before, where I say, hey, our suggestion is not to come back till Christmas, because that doesn't make me feel good at all. You start talking into January that we have our evaluation date. I mean, as much as I don't want to yo-yo, I want to know, yes, before I come back in January, what that is. But I also don't want to go, well, for sure going to be 2 weeks virtual into January too. Selfishly, I want to plan on having my kids back at the beginning of the semester. And if it changes because the numbers say we can't, I'm okay with that too, right? I just don't want, I would rather plan on getting my kids back first of the semester. And again, this is me personal. I'm not speaking for the teachers. And if right after Christmas, the school board says, nope, it's not good enough, we got to stay virtual. We're still in the consistent virtual already. I know Matt's going, no, it's way different because we switched the schedule around and he's panicking right now. I got to know what's going to happen because he's got to move everything. And it's, hell for him. But I guess that's, again, me personally. I wouldn't want to be into January virtual and then come back to hybrid. I would rather plan on coming back hybrid and staying virtual, if that makes sense. If the school board deems it not okay to come back, I totally, and we advise that way too. I'm totally fine with it. I'm being selfish saying I would rather want my kids back and then switch to virtual than the other way around.
So it makes total sense.
Because it's the beginning of a new semester. So maybe new kids, new schedule, new everything.
Everything's going to change then. Matt will probably know better.
January 4th or what?
It would be January 4th would be the start of the third quarter. So the start of the second semester. There are, so like Mr. Carey teaches a lot of semester long classes. There are kids that will be in his second semester Gen Tech. There may be kids that he will have all year long. So some of that scheduling stuff, which again, that's up to the board and whatever they want to decide that way. If they'd like to keep the current hybrid type of model, or if they want to shift to something else. That's going to take some time and some effort in order to schedule that all in. Because we do have classes that are only a semester long, or they are changing, and the kids have to be regrouped to a degree. Some of that will be easier to do because they have a lot of those same classes. It's not going to change, but to a degree, they're going to have to adjust some of their cohorts for the second semester, which is good in the sense that we have a break for Christmas break that they're not together. So shifting those cohort groups around probably isn't as big of a deal because there's a big break right before that.
And it helps me, again, I'm being selfish, but like say construction class, if I'm going to run construction class or something, I can actually run another gen tech class more efficiently with the kids and get more out of them, and they get more out of it than I can a construction class virtually. Right. So that allows me to go, all right, is it looking like I'm going to get in-person time with these kids? Then let's run construction class. If not, let's remove the construction class for the next semester and let's add another option here. You know, so those are things that isn't your guys' problem or whatnot, but it does, obviously, I want to look at that over my Christmas break and then tell Maddie's got 4 days to fix it, you know, that kind of thing.
I mean, could we recommend that we're virtual the rest of the year, then January 4th, we go back to hybrid, and then next month for the next month's school board meeting is when we reevaluate it again?
Is there a problem with going back the 4th after a holiday? As far as medical professionals, I would like to know, do you think there needs to be a lag after holiday season, New Year's, or is the 4th, what I'm asking, is the 4th too soon?
I mean, I'm worried that all of these holidays will be times where people are going to gather. But I'm especially more worried about Christmas than New Year's, I would say, especially for teachers and students. But yeah, if any one of these holidays could set us back, so we could be looking like we're on a good track on December 20th and feel like our numbers are looking pretty good, and then a week after Christmas, it hits the fan again, and we start seeing, you know, all these people with needing to be tested and coming up positive and being on quarantine and things like that. I expect that. I don't know about New Year's. It's really hard to predict what people are going to do. And I guess there could be a possibility that there are, you know, more restrictions in place on a state level at that point that would affect that as well, where the restrictions at a state level for Christmas, people are going to gather in their families, you know, regardless of what the rules are, I would say. But for New Year's, if all the bars are closed and all, you know, everything else is closed that way, then I think there's probably going to be less of that structured gathering, hopefully. But I don't know, really hard to predict. I'm interested to see what happens with Thanksgiving, because I'm hoping that people are getting the message that they should not be gathering right now. I am hopeful that our numbers are going to look a fair amount better by January, just by nature of like burnout of the vulnerable population that's gathering right now. You know, I do think our numbers are going to look better in January. Whether they're going to look better by December 31st in order to predict we're going back that next week, that's really hard to say.
When is the board meeting in December? That's what I worry about, like timing to make a decision.
The 11th.
So that's so far, you know, before January 4th, when there could be so many changes that I worry about not being able to reevaluate before that date. But
yeah, what I worry about is we're trying to prevent the yo-yo effect, right? And you look at the numbers. So, you know, Christmas, we would be in that 2-week period after Christmas, January 4th would be in that period where we would start to see the numbers start to climb. And then things like, you know, if we plan on being hybrid and then everything goes downhill and then you pivot again back to virtual. So it'd be a quick, I mean, it would just be a few days maybe, but I don't think anyone wants that yo-yo. That's what I'm hearing from from this discussion.
Right.
And also anybody exposed on Christmas, so say somebody is at a family gathering or something on Christmas Eve or Christmas, their 14-day quarantine would not be up by that time. So the number of kids and teachers that could potentially be on quarantine for that first day back is probably going to be higher just that first week. But it really depends what the community levels of spread are at that point and how much people are following instructions.
And I'm being selfish, that was the whole thing. Totally okay with the recommendations of the smarter people on this board when it comes to the medical situation. So, and I do understand that saying that talks out of both ends because I'm in effect adding to that yo-yo effect. But again, just like the teachers are saying, the reason why that yo-yo effect exists because they want the kids there. And I did speak with Matt earlier, like, well, maybe to prevent the yo-yo, once the school board says that, that we go virtual, that we can't come back until a quarter or, whatever that is. So at least, and in my head, I had that in my head. So I was like, well, I want to at least get my kids for a little bit before that happens. But in this case, maybe a delayed start to the hybrid would be better. I don't know, but.
I think I know there's sports that are still on too. The going hybrid increases their chances of being exposed and other kids being exposed as well. If their cohort, somebody had in their cohort, then they would have to quarantine in their team or, so I mean, for somebody in sports, it would be beneficial if they were virtual than hybrid. I know there's a lot of kids in sports, but I know that's just a side note, but and Sarah, you're saying that you think the numbers might get better because it's just been progressively worse and worse and worse. I mean, like we're never going to dig out of this hole, but you think that in a month or 6 weeks or something, we might see some turnaround or?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was hoping that we would have already seen the turnaround by now. And again, I think we'll probably see it a little bit in fits and starts as these holidays come through. But yeah, I am hopeful that this phase will burn itself out. It would happen faster if we had a shutdown or if we were able to just, keep everybody home for a little bit. But that's not going to happen. My understanding is there isn't likely to be any statewide action that would prevent people from going about their normal business like they are right now. So I do think that regardless of what is done at a statewide level, there will be a downward shift of this curve. The question is, where is that inflection point? And if the inflection point starts this week or at the end of this weekend or something like that, then by the time we get down to January, we could be back to where we were in, say, mid-October. So if we look at kind of the time period that it took to get to here, if it starts turning the corner, roughly equal amount of time to get back down to where we were. So kind of double where we are right now in terms of total weeks in virtual, needing to be in virtual.
And the people that are more chances of getting exposed because of what they do, how they expose themselves. If they become infected, get COVID or whatever, then they're kind of out of the game is spreading it, right? I mean, 6 weeks from now, if there's a lot of people getting it now, they can't spread it in 6 weeks because they have a 3-month immunity or whatever, right?
Right, and it does affect the quarantine time as well. So if somebody gets exposed during that 3-month period after they've had COVID, they don't need to quarantine. So, then that would mean if somebody had it at the beginning of November and gets exposed at Christmas, they don't have to quarantine based on public health guidelines, as long as they're asymptomatic and there's no special circumstances with that. So the pool of people that are able to be infected and able to spread it to people is getting ever smaller as we infect more people. But we're nowhere near where we need to be in order to say that we're protected as a community, we'll just see those numbers naturally fall because the numbers of encounters between vulnerable people and infected people will go down because they're presumably those people that have been more active in their, say, social life or athletics or things where they might have, or their job exposes them, they will have already had it potentially by that time. So it just makes it less a smaller vulnerable population, but we are nowhere near herd immunity, and we won't be there until we have a vaccine where 60% of the population get it.
Does the hospital or the county is anybody doing testing for antibodies or?
Yeah, we did antibody testing in the summer before we had cases, and we will do our second wave of employee antibody testing. So we're testing every employee of Upland Hills Health, or a good majority, to see what has happened with this most recent wave. We'll be doing that testing, I think, starting first week of December. Roughly, Annika, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're at about a 4.5% of the county has had a confirmed infection so far. So just based on the numbers, and likely many more than that have had it, but either didn't get tested or were asymptomatic. So I think we're probably, if we did widespread immunity testing, we'd probably be somewhere like 5 to 6% have antibodies detectable. That would be my guess.
So what if we recommend, and we can put this to a vote, that we're virtual to January 18th, and that we'll review it again the beginning of the third semester?
When is the board meeting in January?
January 11th.
So that makes sense to me that we would meet like the Thursday before so we can make a recommendation, and that would give everybody a week before we would change that date. Like if we met on the 7th, the board meets on the 11th, and the 18th is the date that we're all waiting to hear about.
Do we want to
No
take a vote?
yo-yoing in between.
I mean, that works for me. Do we want to take a vote?
Yeah, I would like to reiterate too that my opinion, that I stated before, was my opinion, and that the more I think about it across the board through the elementary and the cores that are teaching across the year, that would be advantageous for them too, just having the 2 weeks to prepare for what is coming as you come back instead of like that too. It's likely, again, I don't have them to say that, it's just me right now. So I don't have that exact, but I'm guessing that is likely going to be the suggestion from them too. But again, different than mine because I'm an outcast, but it is what it is.
That's some nice self-reflection there. Very nice. All right, do we want to take a vote? Okay,
Yes.
so raise your hand if you are in support of us meeting on the 7th, board on the 11th. So our recommendation would be to remain virtual. We would evaluate it on the 7th, advise the board on the 11th, return to a method on the 18th. So if you're in support of that recommendation, raise your hand. Okay, so I think it's unanimous.
The board doesn't
Okay.
have to take this advice either. Have they in the past, Mitch or Matt? Have they listened to what this commission's advising them, or obviously they have other input too, as far as from people they're hearing from that we're not hearing from.
Right, they're trying to use I'm going to say multiple venues of information in order to make their decisions. I don't know if they're going to take this direct recommendation and run with it, but they want to know what the report card is. They do want to know what the recommendation from the committee is, and yes, you're right. They will ultimately make the decision on the direction that we will go.
Kind of related to what you just said, Bob, I was wondering if, I guess I'll say this, I found the written a portion of the survey very compelling, very emotional at times, very powerful. And there also seemed to be some direct feedback kind of along these lines for the board. And I was wondering if they will be given an opportunity to read through this feedback as well. It seemed like some of it was sort of not really for us, but kind of for beyond us. So I was wondering about that.
My plan is to share that. I do a weekly update for the board, and I gave them a bunch of information around our current scenario locally and county. The virus. I've got another informational update, and my plan is to put that survey in that update for them to have over the weekend prior to next Monday's meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Is this a special meeting on Monday?
Yep.
Or just for this?
And winter sports.
Oh, okay. So that hasn't been approved yet, or is that? I thought
No, they approved us going forward with winter sports, and then they asked that be on the agenda for an update. Girls basketball started this week. Boys basketball and wrestling were supposed to start next Monday, so I don't know how much of an update they'll get there. And then the conference is looking at, the SWAL conference has looked at what they might do as far as fans allowed in the gym. The Mineral Point School District voted to not allow any fans through December in any home event. We have the ability to live stream any home event, so people can just get on their computer and watch a game, girls game, a wrestling match. Other districts in the conference have voted differently, but so that, well, I'll share that information with the board as well.
So with the last 30 minutes we have left, should we run through the questions from Dr. Dunn so we can, I want to respect everybody's time and wrap up here by 8 o'clock.
Sure. One thing before you do that, Matthew, the friends that are having problems running into internet caps, have them reach out to Mrs. McCoy in the library. She might be able to do something to help alleviate that issue.
Okay, can do.
Matthew, also being on this board, you let us know anything that if we end up staying virtual from now until Christmas, if that ends up happening, student feedback is most wanted from the teachers on those kind of things. Obviously that high school level, and it's a little bit harder at the elementary, but please do that any way you can.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So Dr. Dunn's first question, which I think we mostly answered, but I'll put that back on Mitch and Matt and the administration. But what is the admin's official recommendation regarding how long to continue 100% virtual learning?
When I spoke to Iowa County Emergency Management and Health on Wednesday, their original recommendation was through December 4th. And a week ago, Debbie had said, that the county, her department was looking at extending it through Christmas. And then basically saying that it's difficult, as Dr. Fox had shared and Annika shared, what are the numbers going to do? Is this the peak, and are they going to start to level off and start to maybe inch down or whatnot? She said it's difficult to go farther and does not want to be in the position where she's telling everybody you cannot go to school. She wants kids back in school as much as we all do, but until I had an opportunity to things back and forth with Jane this week, I certainly would have supported at least staying out through the 4th, but a lot of conversations I've had with people in this building in the last couple of days around it makes sense to stay out through the Christmas break. So we all know what will happen when the recommendation goes to the board. They'll be the ones that make the ultimate decision, but it makes sense to stay out because stay out to the 4th. It's 2 weeks, 2 days when we come back before semester, and I'm not sure we get a whole lot out of that. It's deer hunting season. We all know that deer hunting individuals don't really think very clearly once they put the orange on, right there, Mr. Carey.
I was about to say, I resent that.
People are getting together outside of just the family for Thanksgiving as well. You know, you've got the traditional hunting parties, and I don't know how many people will get together for that. So, no, an extended break, as much as I hate it, makes more sense.
And I can kind of speak to question 2, will the report card dictate when the district returns, or will the metrics be updated on major changes? So I don't think, they're using it as a recommendation. So it's interesting that they post it to us, because they've told me they use it as a recommendation and they look at the full picture. And I don't think we're changing, at least our committee, we are not changing the metrics on the report card. So we will keep that the same. I think our recommendation is, they unanimously approved the report card as a guide, as a tool. So I think that answers that question, I believe.
Hey, Annika, about the report card, I was looking at it the other day, and then you alluded to it today. It's the number of testing. I was looking at that. It's super hard to drop below a 2 on that report card.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because of that.
It would be scary. It would be scary bad if we dropped below a 2.
Pretty much the bottom, because I don't know how you would get down to, how you would get to the 1, even, to be honest.
So, well, in the beginning of this pandemic, in the whole country, we were at a testing of like 5 tests across the whole country. Our new goal, our nationwide goal should be about, I think, 14 million per day. I think we're around at 1 million tests per day in the whole country. So if testing supplies, and Justin maybe can speak to this better than I can, but if our supply chain failed, we could encounter scary times, but we are hoping that does not happen. And Justin is working hard to ensure it doesn't.
But regardless of how many positive cases and regardless of how many whatever, all that would still keep it at a 2, because you would have to have the testing chain break to get it below a 2. That's what I was looking at and found interesting the other day.
Yep. Correct.
Yeah, and I was going to say there's huge risks in the global supply chain. PPE is still a risk, tubes, vials, cotton swabs, everything is still a risk. I can't specifically say like what exact science is doing to mitigate the risk, but I'll just say a lot of companies are starting to buy years worth of inventory just to guarantee supply.
And the reason that's in there is because you could conceivably have a low daily case rate because you're not testing. And so it's to kind of give that, so you could potentially get your score up to a high level because you say, we're just not going to test anybody anymore. So then you don't have cases, and then your number looks artificially good. Whereas we know that if we're doing this many tests and we can get below that % positivity, that we know that we're good. So you can get to really good by getting all these things done, but to get to really bad, we're already really bad. We're probably as bad as our score is going to get.
Yeah, I was just basically pointing out that when you see the 2, and that's the first part of the recommendation to be virtual is the 2, realizing I had the epiphany looking at it, like that's realistically just the bottom for somebody like me that doesn't have to do anything, supply chain and all that kind of stuff and testing. That to get to a 1, you're not talking about positive cases and stuff like that. You're talking about medical situations.
Yeah, you could even argue that maybe the floor of the virtual versus like hybrid learning, maybe our score should be a little bit better even before we would go to hybrid, but because of that fact, because that you can't get below a 2. So if 2 is our floor and 2 is the top of the range for virtual, 0 to 2, right, is our virtual. Maybe it should be really 0 to 3, but we also have only gotten to 3 once since September. So that might tell, I think we'll see the data play out that actually this is pretty accurate for whether we should be virtual or not. And again, 2 weeks in a row having to be at that 3, it's hard to get there, especially with the numbers the way they've been looking.
All right. Next question was, given that most of the recent cases are occurring at the middle school, high school level, should we consider reopening the elementary school first?
Jane, would you like to weigh in?
I would say no. I mean, it's harder to socially distance the younger student population. So again, if we open at the same time as when the numbers in the community caused us to have to close, I don't see how that would be any different at this time. It has affected elementary school students at a large scale for having to quarantine. And so I don't see how they would be at less risk.
I think the middle school, high school numbers are probably a reflection of how much mixing outside of school, middle and high school age kids are doing. So, the elementary school, that very conceivably school could be the only risk for those kids. So they're in school and that's the only risk they're going to have. So we're virtual and they're good. But the middle and high school age kids have just so many more exposures with activities or sports or jobs or things like that. And so they're going to continue to have these high rates throughout, hopefully not through the whole virtual, but the school time is maybe less of their overall exposure risk compared to just their exposure risk of being out in the community. But we do then expose some kids who are being careful out in the community. We expose them at a much higher rate when schools open compared to right now, where you can kind of be locked down.
There's also at the grade school level, there are more students in homes with positive people who aren't getting tested because parents don't want to test the little children. So the number of students, letters of positive students or staff that I'm sending out from the elementary school are maybe not as high as the number of cases there actually are.
All right. Next question. What are the limitations of the hybrid model and how can we overcome them, if at all? Staff, student compliance with precautions, ability to contact trace, etc.
I would say these are limitations
Contact tracer.
in-person learning, not the hybrid model specifically, but limitations of in-person learning. Seems like that's what he's kind of getting at. Like, how do we mitigate the risk of having kids in person?
I think if we're talking about preventing the spread of COVID, I think the limitations of having in-person learning are keeping people socially distanced in the building, and preventing those who have had close contact or exposure from entering the building before I'm made aware. And that takes really proactive communication from families, and there's room for improvement there. And there's room for improvement with compliance with precautions in the building as well, I would say, for staff and students. For contact trace. Oh, go ahead.
What was the last thing you said there?
Oh, there's room for improvements with social distancing, masking correctly, communicating when there are symptoms. There's room for improvement with all of that. And then contact tracing, like today was okay. We didn't have any positives, but at times there's just not enough hours in the day or weekend to I'm doing it. It's just becoming increasingly difficult with all of the interactions that people are having. Identifying and getting in touch with all those people is sometimes really time consuming.
So do you still do contact tracing now that they're virtual for 2 weeks or?
Yes.
far? So,
Yes. So the county does not have the capacity to do it. We're still having, as recent as last week, we've had positive people at school, or contagious, I should say. So yes, I'm still having to contact trace because there are still people at risk at school.
So like staff members that are there, because there's no students there now, right?
There are students there for if they need extra help, like we discussed earlier, and then there's athletes there as well.
Because you wouldn't be tracing anyone that doesn't show up at school, I'm guessing, or
I still offer it because the health department does not have the capacity to do that anymore. So I do offer to call people if they need some instruction or some handouts, because the health department can't make those phone calls to all the close contacts like they used to. So I have some nice instructional, pamphlets or handouts that I email to close contacts if the families want me to do that. I do.
All right, and then the last question we had was, if we continued 100% virtual for the remainder of the semester, could the education experience be improved in any way? Well, I'd say we heard from Matt and his friends that if they can, as best they can, standardize how they post and distribute assignments and schedules, that would definitely help.
I think I was thinking about, those days that were set aside for test taking, and it's pretty much a full schedule that when they're in person. So when they go virtual, they would basically have to Zoom an entire 7-hour day or whatever it is, from 8 to 2:30, I think. So they would be in Zooms constantly throughout the day. But if it's going to be virtual for almost 8 weeks, I wonder if it makes sense to see if it makes sense to back out some of that Zoom where it's not a solid 7 hours of Zooming. When it was in person, it made sense, but now that it's virtual, I'm not sure if, and maybe it does, but maybe it's something that can be looked at to see if it's necessary to cram all that in there.
Matt would definitely know how or better if it could work, but I'll just use like my own son as an example. The fact that we're now, if we are going to stay virtual for a longer period of time, so he's an 8th grader. So Tuesdays, boom, boom, boom. He's Zooming, across the board kind of a situation. I don't know if it's possible to separate that out across a couple of days kind of a situation and then have the work time in between. I don't know if that is possible, but those are the kind of things that on Monday, if the school board says that we are going to go virtual to the end of the semester, you can bet that Matt will probably call a full meeting with all of us teachers to get together and synchronize better. Those things will for sure happen. I can't speak exactly how that looks at the elementary.
Yeah, and maybe it wouldn't be a rescheduling. Maybe it would be more of an optional thing. Right now, it's required. You have to be there, since it's so much virtual in high school anyway. So much of the learning is done independently by the kids. Watching YouTube, watching other resources, doing the homework. So maybe it's more useful. Even just recording those lectures to be watched at some other time where it's not smashed into 7 hours. It could free up the teacher during those hours to actually have question and answer, more interaction. But I'm just throwing it out there.
No, it's a good suggestion.
Those are really good things, Bob, and I'll give you an example and showing you the difficulty and examples of those things. So like I have options on a Gen Tech class of mine, like I kind of alluded to earlier. So like Tuesday, I'll give the same lecture as I do on Friday, and the kids need to make either one of those because some of them can't make this one due to other Zoom situations, so they make the Friday and vice versa. The problem with that then logistically becomes it's all due on Wednesday. So if they make this Tuesday and then the following one they do the following Friday because they have that option and they put that in their thing, I got to make sure that they weren't absent and that counts. So it's obviously a nightmare. I just have to be open to that, and the teachers have to be more open to that. But it does give the kids more breathable room as well. So it is good.
One of the things that I did see, Bob, and I'm sure this could be a topic of discussion because, again, being on a computer for 7 or 8 hours a day is really tough on a kid. It's really tough on all of us. We all do it probably more than we want to at this point. I did see from another school within the CISA that week after Thanksgiving when they're virtual, they're actually using their early release schedule. So they're going from, instead of a 50-minute or 45-minute class, they're going down to it's a 35-minute class. So that would be something that we could potentially talk about as well. I think a lot of teachers would fear obviously losing out some of that time because they are using that for lectures and things too. But it's certainly something we can look into.
One thing that I might throw in, and it depends on the day, but not always will a teacher obviously use the full 50-minute class. On one day, if we finish 20 minutes or 30 minutes into the period, we can leave and then take a break and step away until the next period starts. So for the most part, everything is back to back, but there are slight breaks a few times a day, depending on what teachers have scheduled.
I will say one thing that I think we should do every year is Zoom parent-teacher conferences, because that was way better than standing in the gym waiting.
I have heard that quite a bit actually. We kind of made a pact with all the teachers that way. We talked about it a couple days after there, and I have heard that quite a bit, that everybody kind of liked that because it was actually easier to get into the teacher. You're right, you weren't waiting in a gym, you had a scheduled time. But I've heard that a lot of good positive things about that. So I appreciate that feedback.
And I think the other resounding message that I heard from Mr. Carey in the survey was that we don't want additional screen time.
That was at a 97%.
97. Wow. Okay.
So they might want less.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Well, we made it just under 8 o'clock, so we'll give you guys back 8 minutes. Appreciate everybody's input tonight, and hope everybody has a wonderful, safe Thanksgiving.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
If you guys,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, thanks.